I would like to pass on now to the last panelist. Mundar Kassis, he is a representative of the organization Muwatin of the Birzeit University in Palestine, and he would like to talk about the political and economic context of radicalization processes.
Thank you. So it's a hard task. I've been contemplating what is it really that I need to talk about. I mean, I think we globally, we the world, are in a situation of panic. I mean, there's something that we fear. Things are happening in a very strange way. Bombings, attacks, killings here and there. This is not new, but I will come to this a little later. I mean, people have been dying for so many years now, but it suddenly came to Europe. That's what makes it very sort of challenging. It's a different thing, but we'll come to that. I hope. And what I really fear, and I want at the very beginning to mention this because I don't have the capacity to delve into it. But let me mention it. If we are in a situation of panic, then we are great targets for the shock doctrine of the Chicago School. We can be used as a very good market for many other things if we keep panicking. So we probably, if we think about what is it that we need to do as civil society representatives, I think we should get out of the panic and start realizing. Why is there a panic? Because we all realize a few things. We all realize that we don't want to live in the way things are happening today. We don't want to be killed in a metro station or on the street or what have you. This is really fearful. On the other hand, we know that most of us are extremists. I mean, the fact that we gather here is, it takes an extremist to come all the way to discuss this, really. I think most of the people in this room are radicals in the sense that I admire radicalism because otherwise you are compromising, and we don't want to compromise with violent extremism. I hope so. We have to be, radical. I think we all realize that human nature and violence are somehow perplexed in a sense. We haven't lived any part of the human history without violence. The question is, there are many questions that, again, I don't want to delve into. So how systematic? Why? How do you organize it? When does it become legitimate? When is it legal? There are many aspects to this, but it's not also actually about violence because, look at state violences. It is not the question that we are asked. Look at symbolic violence. Look at structure. Things were mentioned this morning. I don't need to repeat them. But again, if it's not extremism as such, if it's not radicalization or being radical as such, if it's not violence as is, where does the problem lie? It comes from somewhere. But we know that there's something wrong, nonetheless. So. And for those who worry so if we take a stance against violent extremism, are we going to stand against, say, the Palestinian resistance? Somebody was saying here. And I feel obliged as a Palestinian to tell you, don't worry. Because the struggle or the combat against violent extremism is not the struggle against, obviously, it is not the struggle against a nation trying to liberate itself from its colonial condition or somebody or a community that wants to live outside hegemony, etc. Obviously not. As a matter of fact, I have reviewed quickly the definition, the UN thing that is set here for terrorism, and it is the definition that does take into account the legitimacy of resistance of a colonial power, etc. So so it's not about that. We shouldn't worry. We shouldn't be fearful or shy when we say we have to combat the current situation in the world because we might be anti-Palestinian. You won't. If you really are combating what you need to combat, you won't be you might be anti-Palestinian, but you cannot be anti-liberation. Yeah, it's So how do we go about this? There is one thing a little far that I will allow myself to start with. I would like to imagine what we are talking about. People trying to enforce a certain, say, lifestyle or a certain type of economy or a certain type of organization as an attempt to monopolize the public sphere and an attempt to monopolize the political organization of our lives, of the public sphere, hence. Who exactly started this notion of trying to monopolize the public sphere? I mean, I'm talking about the current history, not the Middle Ages. I think the whole thing started, and we should really look into it, and I have read very little about this. The whole thing started with the development of the neoliberal world order. Let me remind you of what Fukuyama said back in the early 90s. He said that liberalism has won, the world is shaped in one single way, in a sense that there is one single truth nowadays. The multiplicity of truths is not valid anymore. We have won the battle. Now everybody has to live under this Western system. That was I think, an excellent representation of where things come from. The initial monopolization of how people should live starts actually in the mid-70s with the development of the neoliberal order. It started with all those reasons that we shyly talk about but cannot explain why there is violent extremism. The attack on jobs, the attack on government responsibility over our health and education, the attack against any sort of notion of minimal redistribution of wealth to just maintain the gap a little bit less between the very wealthy and the very poor, an attack on the middle class, an attack on so many things that started actually about 40 years ago, sorry, so clearly. And at the same time, I think there was a whole notion of a promotion of the tolerance toward one of the versions of violent extremisms that most of us talk about without naming it today, which is the jihadist violence extremism. Let me remind ourselves that this actually started when people were supposed to be sent to Afghanistan to fight the Soviets in there. That's where the ideologies were started, and that's when both Europe and the United States started inviting the leaders of these people and providing safe haven from them. Yeah, that's when, well, I mean, Ghanouchi today is a different person, but then when he was actually doing these bombings in Tunisia and he was given safe haven in England, it wasn't because they loved Ghanouchi. It wasn't because of the respect of human rights. I mean, the last person to talk about the respect of human rights would be Margaret Thatcher, really. But he was given safe haven because there was a whole policy of promoting these movements in order to find enough combatants to go to Afghanistan. We know the story. That's where it started, and that's where we started learning that, we have to tolerate all these different ideologies. It is okay to be unlike us, etc., because there was a political and economic reason for it. The reason was, I suspect, entering many new things into the market circulation that were not there before, like opium, or selling weapons, drugs, etc., etc. That is, we all know that this was a major part of the battle on Afghanistan. Now let's look at the world today. The so-called shadow economy, and I'm not an expert, I'm just quoting what I find, use Google. The shadow economy has risen 10 multiples over the past 15 years in the world. And why is that? Because the average job today in the United States lasts for 4.1 years. If you get a job, on average, you can get a project, you can get a contract, you can get a subcontract, you can get many things, but you cannot get a job nowadays. So the sense of security that people have for the future means that they have to find something to do for a higher amount of money in order to be able to sustain yourself for the whole period that you don't have a job between two contracts or between two jobs. That's how the world is trying to live nowadays. You don't have social security really. You cannot secure your education, your health, your what have you, so you have to get enough money to do that. And where does that money lie? It mostly lies in the shadow economy, so you can sell drugs, war trade, etc., do this. And this is actually what's flourishing. It is really flourishing nowadays. I was talking yesterday with my colleagues from Palestine, and the amount of drugs that are sold in poor Palestinian camps, where joblessness is above 50%, etc., where do they get the money from? So if they don't work, how do they buy the drugs? But for some reason, they keep buying them. And obviously, they have to do illegal things to get that money, to buy those drugs, and so on and so forth. Look at the situation of somebody who wants to challenge the system. I don't want to, to agree or disagree with any attempts of, somebody who wants to have Sharia law in France. It's a bit strange for France, but okay, so somebody wants to have Sharia law in France. How can this person nowadays challenge the system? Say, you know what? Let me make this proposal and let's go all for it. If this is if it's absolutely illegitimate to propose this or anything else. Imagine somebody coming today in London and saying, let's talk socialism, guys. I have a proposal to make England a socialist country. I think this person will be treated just like the Sharia guy in Paris. And so can you challenge the system? Can you challenge the existing social contract or the status quo? And if there is no way to challenge the system, if by any challenge to the system, to the existing social contract, you are doomed as an extremist and as a radicalized person, as somebody who needs mental treatment and what have you, then probably you have to seek extrajudicial sort of tools and ways to do this, the illegal forms. If the government is, if we absolutize the existing status quo, if we look at the government as something that is sacred, the existing mode of governance as something sacred, and there is no room for challenging it, then basically we are, going against the freedoms of the whole notion of liberalism and the idea that we can propose something new or something different, whether the majority likes it or not. If we absolutize the right of freedom for people to, demand and try to impose Sharia law in France, then we are actually absolutizing the notion of monopolizing the public sphere by ideologies that are irreversible. It is also very, very dangerous. To imagine that we succumb to this. If you just play the game of imagining, let's try it for a few years. We've tried so many things. We've lived under, Nazi Germany. We lived under this and that, and so we can try this. Actually, it is extremely dangerous. But the fact that we are actually requested or asked to take a position either to absolutize the freedom and let these guys, do whatever they want, or absolutize the legality of the government. So it's either the legitimacy of change or the legality of the state. If these are the two absolutes that we have to choose from, it's just like asking you, to take a position against your own self, because none of us has an interest in absolutizing the power of the state. That would be called monarchy. That would be called a totalitarian regime, when the state is absolutized, when the government is an absolute as itself. Neither do we want the not even an anarchy, but the situation where anybody can have a veto on our lives. I don't like the way you are, you have to stop, otherwise I can kill you. And within those two choices, we are supposed to opt for what we know better, which is the current status of affairs that exist in this world, and we have to be against those mini terrorists that exist here and there, etc. But I think we have a third choice. I think we have, again, to come and seek, and I think that's exactly the the duty of enlightened, progressive civil society. I'm not talking about any civil society. Okay, I'll try to make it in 2 minutes. It is the duty of our civil society to exactly frame the third option, which is a legitimate legal system. We still need the rule of law, but we don't need an absolute state. And we need to define and redefine and keep redefining our scope of legitimacy, not the legality that is set by corporations, etc. What I want to come to eventually is if nowadays you can have your own private security, this is very common. You know, the number of security personnel in Africa in the private sector nowadays is much higher than the total security that works for the government in all of Africa. And because it's cheaper to protect yourself at your own cost if you're a corporation than to pay taxes enough to protect the country or, you know, or the nation. So if you can do your own private security and you can commodify this, that, and the other, there is no room for, you know, the notion of dignity, then probably somebody can also have enough money to sell ideology and to privatize the legality of the ideology that they have. I'm talking about people who want to impose a certain lifestyle on us. So to conclude, I'll stop here, but to make the conclusion, I think that it is so obvious that what we call violent extremism, regardless to the definition, but what we really fear here, is something that has been emerging with the vast polarization that is happening in our world with the neoliberal order. Whether it's the economic is so obvious. I mean, the wealthiest 1% and the number of the poor and the, you know, vanishing of the middle class, etc. This is obvious. The fact that anything can enter into circulation legitimately, including such things as weapons, drugs, human beings, parts of human beings, and what have you. Maybe not so legally, but actually there is lots of room to do this in the current world order. Gives the same room for the attempts to monopolize our lives by the others. So if we need to stop the youth from being attracted to there, and if we need to create a situation whereby this stops being feasible simply, what we need to start with is not the minds of the kids who are in school, who are the 14 years old, because they're actually learning pretty much the same things that we've learned, but rather the whole environment that has created the need to find a way out for your life, the need to struggle for existence. And you know what? Daesh, ISIS in Syria. I've asked my Syrian friends about the development of Daesh. Remember, there was the Free Army, then al-Nusra, right? Then the Daesh. People have moved from the revolution on the street to the Free Army because they've lost their jobs in Aleppo, for example. Because of the destruction of the factories, they've lost their jobs. Somebody said, you know what, you can become a combatant, and here's $500 per month. Then al-Nusra came and said, okay, we'll pay $600. I'm talking, you know, I don't have evidence, but this is what my friends keep telling me. Then Daesh started paying $800 and $900 per month per combatant. And that's what, you know, it attracts people. I'm not saying there is no mentality or ideology behind it. I'm saying that many people, and probably most of the people who are there, not all, definitely, most of the people who are there probably wouldn't be there if they had other options. And why do we not have those options? I mean, why should we go and try to change the way they think instead of changing the general atmosphere and the general situation where they can choose something better, where we can be more convincing to them? Because, you know, I can convince somebody that you can do this or that if this and that are both options, but I cannot convince them if the only option is that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. So I was told to have a very short debate. This is a very, very broad subject, it seems. We had now a pretty global approach here, so it seemed to me now with the last intervention almost that we have to change the entire global world order of the world today in order to de-radicalize some extremist groups, which I would like to remind, I always truly, honestly believe that extremist groups are always the minority of humankind, but they have the power and they have the weapon, and then they can change the world or the way how the world goes.